Karen towed my car without warning, not knowing it was an active FBI surveillance unit. I always thought suburban life was meant to be predictable. A quiet street, friendly neighbors, and an unspoken understanding that even if disagreements arose, they rarely escalated beyond passive-aggressive notes. I spent most of my days savoring that mundane comfort after decades in the field, even if it meant blending into the background. But on one fateful Wednesday afternoon, that fragile peace shattered in an instant. It was about 4:30 p.m. when I stepped out of my modest two-story home on West Elm Avenue. The light was golden, the air warm but not stifling, a picture-perfect evening in the suburb. I was ready to run a few errands before meeting a friend for coffee when an unexpected commotion disrupted the calm. Across the street, the low, rumbling sound of an engine grew louder until it unmistakably registered as the sound of a tow truck's winch clattering down the street. I squinted at its approach. The truck was painted a garish neon green, an odd choice, in my neighborhood at least, and its driver seemed overly focused, hardly giving any regard to the usual suburban pleasantries. Before I knew it, I saw Karen Little step out from her sleek, mint-colored sedan parked haphazardly on the curb. Karen was notorious around the area, the self-appointed enforcer of a neighborhood standards that she'd concocted out of thin air. With her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand and her phone glued to her ear with the other, she bellowed a series of hurried instructions at the tow truck driver. I remember the moment vividly. In Karen's clear, sharp tone, she yelled, "You, get over here now! Tow that car immediately." I couldn't quite make out if she was referring to her own vehicle or someone else's, but in that moment, my heart skipped a beat when I saw the tow truck hook latch onto the side of my car, a 1998 sedan, usually parked discreetly in my driveway. I rushed out, my mind in a frenetic state of disbelief. "Hey, that's my car," I shouted, waving my arms as I sprinted toward the growing chaos. The tow truck driver, a man with a gruff voice and a permanent scowl, glanced briefly at me, muttered something I couldn't hear over the din, and began lifting my car onto the flatbed as if it were no more than a stray shopping cart. Before I could get close, police cruisers started pulling up along the street. Within minutes, unmarked black SUVs with tinted windows, and then, to my utter disbelief, several vehicles marked with the unmistakable insignia of the FBI circled our block. I froze in my tracks as agents in dark suits poured out of the vehicles. It was like a scene from a Hollywood thriller unfolding right in front of my eyes. I caught a glimpse of Karen standing smirking beside the tow truck, her eyes darting between her phone and the chaos that ensued. "I'm enforcing the rules," she shrieked, completely oblivious to the fact that what she was doing was about to turn my quiet evening into a federal incident. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, but the line was already abuzz with alarmed voices. I tried to shout, "My car belongs to," but the words died as one of the agents, a tall, imposing figure with a steely gaze, placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Sir, you need to calm down," he said in a clipped, authoritative tone. "Step back and let us handle this." I stood there, stunned, as I watched the tow truck driver secure my car onto the flatbed and drive away, the vehicle disappearing slowly into the maze of unmarked federal cars. In my gut, something wasn't right. My car wasn't just a car. It was a piece of evidence from an old FBI undercover operation that had been lingering on my property for years, an artifact from my days working undercover. Though I'd retired from active duty and transitioned to private investigations, I had managed to secure a few classified items for future reference. One of those items, my unmarked sedan, had been repurposed by the FBI as a surveillance vehicle in a sting operation targeting a major drug trafficking ring. It was supposed to be stored away in a secure facility, not parked on a suburban driveway. I blinked hard, trying to reconcile the bitter irony. Karen, in her overzealous attempt to cleanse the neighborhood, had inadvertently targeted an FBI asset, and now the repercussions promised to be monumental. My mind raced as I retreated back toward my house. Over the past few years, I had let the calm of suburban life lull me into complacency. I had built a modest routine: mornings spent poring over old case files, evenings spent in my study tinkering with mechanical puzzles, I never imagined that one day, a petty neighborhood enforcer's misguided sense of authority could ignite a federal-level fiasco. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and grabbed a thick file from my dusty bookshelf. It was filled with FBI memos, technical reports, and my own notes from when I had worked on the undercover project. Among the documents, I found evidence that my car modified to perform as an inconspicuous surveillance unit was not only on loan to the Bureau, it was flagged for critical intelligence in ongoing investigations. How did it come to reside in my driveway? I had moved it there temporarily during a period of transition. A bureaucratic mix-up, perhaps, or had someone intentionally relocated it? I began methodically reviewing my notes on the operation. There were details about how the vehicle was meant to be closely guarded, its presence limited to pre-approved secure lots. But somewhere along the line, a miscommunication had occurred. The paperwork had apparently been misplaced or misfiled. And now, thanks to Karen's call for enforcement, a tow truck had taken possession of an asset that was far from ordinary. The more I pieced together, the angrier I became. I recalled the countless passive-aggressive complaints Karen had spewed over trivial issues, improperly trimmed hedges, non-matching mailbox numbers, and even the occasional draping of a car in faded bumper stickers. But none of that would have mattered if she hadn't taken it upon herself to adopt the mantle of the neighborhood czar. Karen had fashioned herself as the arbiter of all things aesthetic and orderly. And today, her obsession with arbitrary rules had collateralized a major federal investigation. I needed answers. So I called an old friend from my federal days, Agent Marcus Reed, a man known for his unorthodox methods and an unyielding disdain for bureaucratic missteps. When his gruff voice answered, I launched into the events of the afternoon. Don't you understand? Marcus. That car wasn't mine, it belonged to the FBI. They've been using it for an undercover op for months. And now it's been towed by some idiot claiming a violation of some bogus HOA code. There was a long pause on the other end, before Marcus finally spoke. Listen, Donovan, this is serious. If that vehicle was compromised, our entire operation could be at risk. You need to document every word Karen said, every action taken, and I'll pull some strings. We'll need to go to the field, verify the chain of custody, and see exactly what paperwork was supposed to be in place. I promised him I would, even though I felt a cocktail of anger, dread, and disbelief swirling in my chest. The thought of Karen's petty vendetta colliding with federal secrecy was too absurd not to be infuriating. By the time dusk fell, my phone buzzed with urgent calls from both neighbors and local law enforcement. Rumors spread like wildfire, apparently. Karen had been seen in full regalia, high-heeled, clipboard in hand, roaming nearby intersections, declaring that her community standards must be enforced regardless of the cost. Social media posts exploded with hashtags like Just Fake HOA, Overreach, and DMFBI fail. At 7:15 p.m., I hurriedly gathered my notes and drove toward the impound lot where my sedan was held. The fluorescent lights of the lot cast harsh shadows on rows of cars, but mine, seemingly indistinct, sat isolated in a secluded corner. As I approached it, I could see the tow truck driver standing guard, phone in hand, and an imposing sense of finality settling over the scene. I demanded to see the paperwork authorizing the tow. The driver, clearly intimidated by the sudden arrival of federal-style seriousness, fumbled through his stack of documents. My eyes locked on a crumpled sheet that bore the heading, Ravenwood Community Enforcement Notice. I could hardly believe it. It was signed by none other than Karen Little, with an official-looking stamp that, if you squinted, might have seemed legitimate. But there was no county seal, no municipal letterhead. It was a forgery. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Within minutes, local law enforcement arrived on the scene. I presented my documentation and explained, in a trembling but steady voice, that the towed vehicle was an active FBI asset and that Karen's false enforcement order was not only a gross misuse of power, it was a federal offense. The officers exchanged puzzled looks and then radioed for additional backup. In mere moments, a squad car pulled up with officers who donned badges that clearly read FBI alongside local markings. The case was escalating far beyond a neighborhood squabble. Karen's sedan had long since been spirited away by the tow truck, but now the focus was on her. I soon learned that Karen had mysteriously vanished from the scene. Her car, her home, everything was dark. Rumors suggested she might be hiding out, or perhaps was taken in for questioning. The tension in the air was palpable. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering and watching the unfolding drama with a mix of horror and vindication. I sat in my car, reeling from the chain of events. While Agent Reed arrived on the scene, his face was set in a grim line. "This is one of the most bizarre enforcement actions I've seen in my career," he said, glancing around at the gathering crowd. "We're going to need to trace every document, every phone call, to see how someone like Karen could masquerade as an enforcer without any oversight." I nodded silently. The irony was maddening. Karen had taken it upon herself to police the neighborhood, punishing minor infractions and grandstanding as the arbiter of community standards, and in doing so, she'd inadvertently compromised a sophisticated FBI operation. The realization that a petty, self-appointed HOA enforcer could upend federal protocols was a stark reminder of how chaos often lurks behind the veneer of suburban tranquility. As the night deepened, flashlights swept across the impound lot, and I made my way home. Every sound seemed amplified: the distant hum of a police siren, the soft murmur of neighbors discussing the events, and the deep thump of my own racing heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play here. Later that week, I met with Agent Reed at a local diner, over stale coffee and half-eaten donuts. We pored over the documents and reviewed security footage from the impound lot. The footage was grainy but revealing. I watched in disbelief as Karen's voice could be heard over a phone call recorded by the tow truck's dash cam. She said, "Lock it in. I want that car gone. No questions asked." The tone was cold, professional, even as she casually mentioned details that suggested she'd received prior instruction from someone higher up. "Her actions weren't random," Reed murmured. "There's a chain of command here that we haven't uncovered yet." That was my next thought, my next drive home. Who would want my FBI car out of the picture? And why would someone enlist Karen's help, a bully with little authority, to commit such a reckless act? I started making calls. I reached out to an old colleague in the Federal Archives, someone who still remembered the nuances of asset management and vehicle tracking. Slowly, threads began to unravel. It turned out that my sedan was part of a broader surveillance network, and its removal would have jeopardized ongoing sting operations in several cities. In other words, if Karen's tow had successfully removed the vehicle before it was flagged, the entire operation could have been compromised, and lives might have been lost in the ensuing chaos. The thought was gut-wrenching. I spent hours combing through emails and cross-referencing operation logs. It became clear Karen wasn't acting in isolation. Her rogue enforcement was part of an intentional, yet chaotic strategy used by some corrupt elements within a poorly regulated network of neighborhood watchdogs, an informal group that had somehow intersected with private interests. Rumors hinted at a local property development group that had found a way to profit from driving out residents whose properties were to be rezoned. By creating a climate of fear and false authority, they could swoop in, buy up properties at bargain prices, and remodel entire blocks according to their vision. I couldn't believe the depths to which suburban paranoia could be manipulated. I decided to reach out to a few trusted neighbors, people who had quietly suffered under Karen's diktats over the past year. I called them individually, and, to my relief, many had experienced similar tactics. One neighbor, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Alvarez, recounted how Karen had once sent her a warning notice for having improperly aligned flower boxes. Another, a young father named Jeremy, complained about a hefty fine for having mismatched lawn furniture. It became alarmingly clear Karen's real goal wasn't community safety, it was control, intimidation, and ultimately, financial gain for someone else. I arranged a secret meeting at a local community center, a nondescript hall tucked between a laundromat and a used car dealership. In a dimly lit room, a small group gathered: residents tired of petty harassment, frustrated by Karen's relentless enforcement of non-existent rules. They called themselves the Neighbors United. I explained what I had uncovered: the fraudulent enforcement notices, the manipulated tow truck incident, and the potential connection to a shadowy local property developer. Murmurs filled the room. Faces turned grim. A consensus quickly emerged. We had to expose the truth publicly, both to halt Karen's reign of terror and to alert the authorities about the potential link between her actions and this behind-the-scenes real estate manipulation. Over the next few days, I collaborated with the Neighbors United to compile a dossier. We gathered copies of Karen's notices, screenshots from social media posts where residents pleaded for help, and even recorded testimonies from those who had been personally victimized. I cross-referenced these with zoning board applications and found that several properties flagged by Karen were now marked for redevelopment potential, a euphemism for what looked like an imminent land grab. The turning point came during a scheduled city council meeting. With the weight of our evidence in hand, I prepared to speak publicly about how Karen's rogue tow had set off a chain reaction leading to a federal fiasco and, more shockingly, how it was all tied to a hidden agenda aimed at forcibly altering our neighborhood's demographics and property values. When I took the podium, I still recalled that terrifying moment outside my driveway. I recounted every detail: the unusual neon tow truck, Karen's callous tone, and my mounting horror as the FBI vehicles encircled the block. I laid out the dossier, piece by piece, before a stunned council and a room full of community members. The evidence was irrefutable. Karen's fabricated enforcement was no accident. It was orchestrated as part of a larger scheme. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from disbelief to indignation. Some even clapped in agreement. Meanwhile, a stern-looking council member demanded, "This must be investigated immediately." I nodded, my heart pounding with both relief and anxiety. After the meeting, the local media got wind of the controversy. Headlines flashed across online news sites: suburban scandal fake, HOA enforcer tows, FBI car, hidden land grab plot exposed. Neighbors who had felt powerless finally found their voices amplified. And then, as if the incident wasn't controversial enough, a twist emerged that shook even us hard-bitten residents. Late one night, while reviewing additional documents, I received an anonymous tip via email. The message included a scanned document, a letter from a senior official at the local real estate department, with the subject line, "Approval for Community Revitalization Initiative." In the letter, the official lauded adaptive community oversight and praised Karen's innovative enforcement methods as a model for maintaining neighborhood standards. It was clear that someone in a position of authority had covertly supported Karen's operations as part of an ambitious plan to improve property values through forced redevelopment. That document, if verified, would expose a direct collusion between unscrupulous municipal officials and shadow developers. I forwarded it immediately to Agent Reed and a couple of trusted journalists. The fallout, I knew, would be explosive. By now, the house of cards was nearly collapsing. FBI agents were re-interviewing witnesses. City officials were scrambling for explanations. And Karen's whereabouts remained unknown. She had vanished from public view, likely in an attempt to evade accountability. Rumors circulated that she might have fled to a neighboring county. But the truth was that the net was closing in around her, and everyone complicit in the scheme. That weekend, the Neighbors United held an impromptu gathering outside the city hall. With smartphones ready to record, we shared our experiences and vowed that the community would no longer be bullied by imposters masquerading as enforcers. We set up a live stream that captured every impassioned word, every tear, every vow to reclaim our rights. The video quickly garnered thousands of views, igniting public outrage. Comments flooded in, with people sharing similar stories from other neighborhoods, each one a thread in a tapestry of systemic abuse. It became clear that what had started as an isolated incident on West Elm Avenue was part of a widespread pattern of exploitation and fraud. Agent Reed appeared on a local news segment later that week, confirming that an investigation was underway into both Karen's actions and the suspicious rezoning proposals tied to the property developer. His final words on the broadcast were measured yet resolute: when a person misuses the trust of a community, The consequences are far-reaching. We will not rest until every piece of evidence is examined and justice is served. For me, that evening was a turning point. I sat in my study, illuminated only by the glow of my computer screen and the fading sunlight, and realized that my quiet life had been irrevocably changed. I had become the reluctant catalyst for a movement that demanded accountability, transparency, and respect for the little freedoms we cherished. I took a deep breath and typed out one final message to the community mailing list. Friends, we stand on the brink of a new chapter. Let's be vigilant. Let's be proud. And most of all, let's ensure that no one ever again uses fake authority to tear apart the fabric of our lives. As I hit send, I felt both dread and hope. The wheels of justice and reform had already begun to turn. I knew there would be hardships ahead, a long legal battle, potential retribution from those threatened by our resolve, and the painful process of rebuilding trust in institutions that were meant to serve us. But for the first time in a long while, I believed that our voices could bring about real change. That night, I stepped outside and looked up at the starry sky. The hum of distant police radios merged with the murmurs of a community awakened. Although the chaos of the day still echoed in my mind, I felt a stubborn pulse of determination steadying my heart. It was a message for anyone listening, a call to arms for everyday citizens tired of living under the shadow of unchecked power. If you see injustice, if someone's misusing authority, even if it's hidden behind a fake HOA, an overzealous tow truck operator, or bureaucratic negligence, stand up. Fight back, protect your community, and never let them dictate who belongs and who doesn't. And so it began, a battle that was no longer just about a tow truck or a misappropriated car, but about the very soul of our neighborhood. We were united in our purpose, even as the full scale of the deception came into view. The wheels were set in motion for an inquiry that could reshape local governance and expose layers of corruption that had long festered in silence. As I prepared for the next chapter of this fight, I couldn't help but feel an odd sense of satisfaction mixed with trepidation. Justice, like a well-tended garden, might take time to grow back, but it would eventually flourish if we were willing to nurture it with persistence, truth, and the courage to confront those who would undermine our collective integrity. That was the beginning of our uprising, the day when a simple tow truck call turned into a symbol of resistance against corruption and fraud. Now, with the FBI's involvement, a city council in turmoil, and an enraged community rallying behind us, there was no turning back. I knew that my quiet life had ended forever in a new era, one defined by grassroots determination and accountability, was just taking root. The morning after the council meeting, I found myself standing in front of an open manila folder filled with notes, witness statements, and a stack of screenshots from neighborhood forums. The air in my study felt denser than usual. I hadn't slept. My mind was too busy connecting dots, reviewing footage, piecing together the paper trail Karen had tried so hard to scatter. She thought the tow truck would be the end of it, that I'd be too embarrassed, or too outnumbered, to fight back. She had no idea I used to track drug traffickers through Eastern Europe with nothing but a burner phone and my gut. The previous night's city council meeting had lit a fuse. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months came up to me in the grocery store, whispering. I got one of those letters too. A retired librarian handed me a crumpled citation she'd kept taped to her fridge. It accused her of harboring unregistered flower varieties. The absurdity wasn't funny anymore. It was coordinated harassment. Back in my study, I called Marcus Reed again. I need to know what was inside that car. I said. He didn't answer right away. I could hear him exhale slowly through the line. Donovan, he said, you know we can't share operational intel. Not even with you. Not anymore. They dragged it onto a flatbed like a broken sofa. I know, so tell me if we're talking simple surveillance or something that's going to burn this neighborhood to the ground. He sighed. Okay, listen carefully. That vehicle was outfitted to run passive data sweeps. Nothing flashy, nothing dangerous, but it was linked to a statewide narcotics net. Live tracking, it was receiving more than it was transmitting. My stomach tightened. I'd assumed the car had been dormant. maybe even decommissioned. But it was still plugged in, still active, and Karen had made it disappear. At noon, I met with a small group of neighbors under the excuse of a block watch chat. The meeting was off the books and invitation only. People came with iced coffees, lawn chairs, and stories. One by one, they shared what Karen had done to them, fines for leaving Halloween decorations up past November 1st, threats of lien enforcement for unapproved shutters, a single mom cited for letting her kid's bike rest against the mailbox. She'd even photoshopped some of the violations to look official. But what struck me most was how many people had been too ashamed to speak up. They thought they were alone. They weren't. I laid out the folder, showed them copies of the forged citations, the unsigned HOA memos, the tow authorization that wasn't filed through any legal department, and then I showed them the developer documents. Yes, developer. 2 weeks before my car was towed, Karen had signed a community improvement intent form as a self-declared president of a homeowners association that didn't exist. That document had been submitted to the county with a proposal to revitalize and rezone outdated lots for modern efficiency. In plain English, tear down and sell, and guess whose homes were on that list? Ours. I filed a formal fraud complaint with the county clerk and shared copies with the city planner's office. But it wasn't enough. So I went to the press. Channel 6 ran the headline, "Fake HOA President Linked to FBI Tow Incident. Zoning Scandal." The story went viral within hours. Karen tried to call it a smear campaign, said she was just trying to keep the neighborhood beautiful, but screenshots don't lie. Within 48 hours, the county council scheduled an emergency ethics hearing. Karen was served with a cease and desist. The towing company was subpoenaed, and my phone started ringing with names I hadn't heard in years. Old contacts, real ones, people with clearance. On day 4, I received a sealed envelope at my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single flash drive. When I plugged it in, I found surveillance footage. Not from me, from them. The FBI had been recording too. There, in grainy clarity, was Karen, standing beside my car, smiling, speaking into her phone. "It's done. He won't fight it. He has no idea what that car is really for." And the voice on the other end, distorted. Male, but one phrase came through clear. "Good, that clears the asset. Phase 2 starts Monday." I leaned back in my chair, the full weight of what was happening crashing down like a wave. Karen wasn't just acting out of pettiness. She was part of something far bigger. And Monday was 5 days away. We didn't wait for Monday. By Friday morning, we were meeting in the church basement, 15 of us. Teachers, veterans, small business owners. People Karen had pushed. People she underestimated. I showed them the clip, not the whole thing, just enough to light the fire. "We're not dealing with a neighbor anymore." I said, "We're dealing with a network." So we gave ourselves a name, Clearview Watch. Our job wasn't to fight fire with fire, it was to bring light. We split into teams. One dug into property transfers linked to CRS Holdings. Another traced financial connections to the city council. I focused on federal intel, using every contact I had left. And then we found it. Karen was just one of several HOA imposters planted in targeted zip codes, all areas marked for quiet redevelopment. The formula was simple: manufacture complaints, harass homeowners, undervalue the neighborhood, trigger zoning rescues, all while pushing people out. Our homes weren't in the way. They were the targets. On Sunday night, 2 days before Phase 2, we launched a full digital drop. Every forged letter, every financial connection, every audio clip. We pushed it to media, tagged public officials, and released it with the hashtag #ChuggaClearviewTruth. By morning, it was national. That afternoon, the mayor held a press conference, called for a state-level audit of all neighborhood associations formed after 2020. Karen tried to go dark, but she was already trending. Even her former allies turned on her. And when she tried to file a defamation suit, the FBI unsealed a redacted warrant. enough to show she was a named party of interest in an obstruction case. The community didn't just breathe. We roared. We filed a petition to turn the fake HOA office into a real community resource center. We passed city ordinances to protect gardens, non-standard paint colors, front porch gatherings. And I got a call from Marcus. He said, "Donovan, you broke protocol, but you also broke a case we couldn't." I asked if he wanted me back. He laughed. "No, but we want your files." Karen was arrested 3 weeks later. Wire fraud, conspiracy, federal impersonation. Her mugshot was plain. No clipboard, no power. Just a woman who tried to steal a car and ended up dismantling a lie. But the damage she did, it made something better grow. I never thought a stolen car would bring a neighborhood together. 3 months after Karen's arrest, the streets of Clearview felt different. Not quieter, they buzzed with life. Kids rode their bikes without nervous glances. Lawns bloomed with sunflowers and murals. Front porches that were once ghostly were now lit up with string lights and shared laughter. The fake HOA sign that once hung from the corner lamppost, gone. In its place, a handmade wooden placard, "We belong here." The city granted us full recognition as a civic cooperative. Clearview Commons, no president, no fines. A rotating board of volunteers, equal votes, and public minutes. The building Karen used as her compliance headquarters had sat vacant for weeks. We repainted it, inside and out. It was now the Clearview Resource House, a library, tool shed, and free counseling center. Marcus even pulled some strings to get a cybersecurity workshop series started there. Funny how quickly a poison turns to soil. I didn't take credit publicly. I didn't want to. But the truth had a way of finding its way back to my doorstep. One evening, as I was sorting old case files in my garage, a young woman stopped by. She introduced herself as Tasha, a community college student writing a paper on neighborhood autonomy and digital overreach. "Mr. Price," she said, pulling out her recorder, "how did you know it would work? How did you know exposing Karen wouldn't backfire?" I smiled. I didn't. I just knew what silence costs. Karen took a plea deal. 3 years probation, a lifetime ban on holding civic roles, and mandatory restitution to the families she threatened. She moved out quietly. No goodbye. But her shadow didn't vanish. There were still council members who had looked the other way. Still developers licking their wounds, looking for the next block to bleed. We stayed vigilant. We kept records. Because justice, once tasted, makes you crave permanence. The biggest change, people learned each other's names. We hosted block potlucks and shared seedlings. We formed a neighborhood emergency response plan. Someone even started a community podcast. I spoke on the second episode. I read a single line from the old HOA citation Karen left me. "Vehicles inconsistent with community vision must be removed." Then I said, "Turns out, our vision was just fine. It was her prescription that needed correction." Wide-angle evening shot of Clearview Commons. The resource house glows from within, full of people sharing stories. Kids play tag under porch lights. Music hums softly from a Bluetooth speaker perched on a stoop. Donovan stands beside his parked car, restored, clean, and finally still. Maya, his niece, helps paint a new sign for the community garden, "Rooted Together." The camera slowly rises, showing the patchwork of gardens, lights, and chairs, all pulsing with quiet life. Above them, stars begin to break through. Peace, earned. When control pretends to be care, it becomes corruption. When community becomes collaboration, it becomes unstoppable. The lesson isn't to fight every rule, it's to ask, who does the rule protect? And if the answer isn't everyone, then it's time to write new ones. Call to action. Have you ever been threatened by fake authority? Has someone weaponized order against you? Share your story. Repost if you believe neighborhoods should empower, not intimidate. Tag someone who needs to hear. You don't need permission to belong.